Welcome back to the Hoopball YouTube channel for part 3 of our draft strategy series. We have talked about getting the tips and tricks necessary for your head-to-head drafts, your roto drafts, and now I am very fortunate to be joined by Hoopball's Dynasty Hoops expert and one of the co-hosts of the Punt Intended podcast. Rhett Bauer, you are here today to talk to us about Dynasty drafts. How are you doing, man?
I am great, and I could not be more excited. We were talking before this about how you're going to be a stand-in for the audience, and I am so excited that you decided to join the mock draft we're currently doing because you can't learn about it unless you get into it. So I'm excited to have you in there, and I'm excited to be here to talk about it with you and the audience as well.
And exactly like Rhett said, I don't know anything about Dynasty Draft. I'm in a mock draft with him and Travis and a bunch of other listeners of your podcast. This is literally my first time drafting the Dynasty format, and I don't know what I'm doing. I'm trying to reprogram my brain a little bit, and it's really fascinating hearing people's rationales in that chat, and just I'd say that there are more things going through your head in a first-time Dynasty draft than any other format. There are so many factors to consider. You are building a team from scratch, and you have to weigh whether you want to compete in the immediate, more in the future, or both, which certainly I'd say the best of them. Probably gear yourself towards both. I would assume that would probably be your philosophy. So, I mean, let's just start off from the basics here. What exactly is a dynasty format? Some of our listeners might be familiar with a keeper league format. I'm in a keeper league, and that's sort of my introduction to it, where you keep a certain amount of players every year. But how is that different from a dynasty league?
So in a keeper league, you keep a certain number of players. Dynasty, you keep everybody. And typically in dynasty leagues, you have a lot more future picks available to you to treat it more like an actual NBA sort of environment, to be able to, if you're contending, trade all of your first round picks to go out and get somebody if you really wanted to. In a lot of keeper leagues, I'm not sure that the pick availability is there. And then obviously you have a different type of strategy because you can only keep guys for a certain number of years, or there's some sort of draft round penalty or salary penalty. Like there's stuff like that. Whereas in dynasty, unless you're doing a real salary dynasty, which is a whole nother level that we're not going to get into today.
Oh
If it's just a standard dynasty, you could literally keep the same team forever. And that's what a lot of guys try to do through the draft. That's why you'll see guys like Cade Cunningham going so high. They're like, oh, I'm going to knock down 15 years of Cade Cunningham right now.
Yeah, and that element's really interesting to me, is like evaluating a rookie. It's particularly in the very early stages of a dynasty draft. And fill me in too, like when you guys go through the draft process every year, are you just selecting from the rookie class, like on a year-to-year basis, or how does that player pool work?
So it depends on what you want to do with the league. Sometimes you'll have the waiver people in there as well to mix in with the rookies, because if you're a bad team, if you're a good team and you traded all your picks away, then the rookie draft doesn't do you any good because you've got 4th and 5th round picks, let's say. But if you could go out there and draft a Justin Holiday with your 4th round pick, then you fill those spots that would normally be rookies with vets that can help you. But typically it is just a rookie draft, and people extremely, extremely overvalue those picks in certain situations.
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, sometimes that's the same case in real life NBA. So that is definitely have the correlation between those two in that respect. But I can definitely see in a dynasty format that value being a little overinflated, maybe to some extent. I mean, I'm in this mock draft that we are in right now. I was struggling very hard with my first pick because I didn't know whether I should start off with a solid contributor that I know a lot about. I was debating Steph Curry. And then I was also weighing LaMelo Ball or Cade Cunningham with that first pick of mine in that draft. 2 guys that, like you said, have a ton of runway ahead of them, a lot of potential, and obviously will be a stronger part of my dynasty team well beyond Curry's, once Curry's out of the league. I mean, who knows how many good elite years he has left in him. Give me let's say that I have the 9th pick in the draft. I mean, and I want to start from that perspective where I do start with Curry. How would you go forward from there? Would you really make an emphasis on building a strong team to compete with Curry now? Or do you think it'd be wiser to stack him with some younger players and start to, both build for the future? Or, yeah, I mean, let's assume that that's the set of circumstances. Just with Steph Curry.
So it gets really interesting because people ask that question all the time. It's like, okay, at pick 25, what should I do in a dynasty startup? It's like, I don't know who's there. I don't know who you've taken already. Like, I don't know any of that information. There's so much, like you said before, there's so much information that goes into dynasty drafts that redraft you just don't have to worry about. But I will say, I was thinking about this before we got started. The overarching point I can make is you can almost always get older. You can always get older because there's a team out there who drafts Curry, and then the rest of the draft, they're like, I'm kind of good to just like, this young guy seems good. And then this young guy seems good. And then you're 15 rounds into it and you look back and Curry's your only guy over 28. And teams do that. And so in that situation, if your team is good, you can go out there and you can trade your, I don't know, Fred VanVleet for Steph Curry if you really wanted to. That's a trade that can happen and probably has happened before, if not getting something else along with Steph Curry because Fred VanVleet is younger. So that's the way I typically look at it is right off the bat with your core, you can always get older. And so then from there, it just comes down to value at whatever spot. Like in the mock draft that you're talking about, I had 4th pick overall. So I got Giannis, which means I had 21 overall on the back end of the second round. And if Steph Curry had been there for me at 21, it would have been really tough not to take Steph Curry because that's such an insane value, even though it completely makes no sense with Giannis in terms of team building. Like I could probably end up trading Steph Curry to somebody who wanted him bad enough just on plain value. So without knowing what the draft is. And that's why anytime somebody asks me a question, I was like, send me a picture of your draft room. Like screenshot the entire thing, send it to me because I got to know who your last 6 picks were. I got to know who your team is, all of that stuff. But generally, you can always get older.
So, yeah, that's an interesting philosophy, like how much of your draft, I feel like in this format in particular, your draft is influenced more by the makeup of the other teams around you more than any other format, both in terms of just stat sets, just competing in that particular year, but even the longevity of certain teams down the road. Like I like the idea of stacking certain that philosophy is a very interesting one that makes a lot of sense. Like you can always get older, but there will always be people looking for those younger prospects as well.
And you'll pay a premium to get younger. I promise you that. I just made a trade in my 12 team that's been going for 5 years, I think. And I traded LeBron James and Russell Westbrook for Ben Simmons and Wendell Carter Jr. Like that's the type of win now production I traded to get younger. I'm a punt 3 free throws, so Ben Simmons fits my build incredibly well. Yeah. And so it made sense. But I went through a massive retool this summer, and that's the type of payment. Like this guy gave up Ben Simmons to get a really better Ben Simmons and LeBron, and then Russell Westbrook on top of it. So it's like that's the sort of premium you can expect to pay in most leagues when you're trying to get younger.
And I want to piggyback off of something that you mentioned there. You mentioned you have a punt free throw team. Punting is obviously a category that's frequently used in head-to-head drafts. And if you're starting up your own dynasty league and you go with a punt format, how much does that follow you into the years following? Like, does punting strategy take on sort of a new life with longevity in mind? I mean, yeah,
it does. So in the mock draft that we're talking about, I took Giannis 4. I took Ben Simmons 21, which might be a reach for a lot of people, but you're punting threes and free throws with Giannis, and I know that I need assists, so I went out and got Ben Simmons because I knew he wasn't going to be there with the Luka owner 3 picks behind me. And as soon as I made the pick, the Luka owner was in the chat upset about it. So that punt will almost certainly, if it's that extreme, if you're like right off the bat, you have Giannis, you have Zion, you know you're going to be punting that, you will probably continue to punt that for the duration of the league because once you get into it and the league starts getting competitive and those teams start stacking up at the top, trying to stack those win now players as they start to move their youth around, you're going to solidify that punt more and more and more. And if you could see my 12 team roster in the league that's been going for a couple of years, you would be absolutely baffled because it is the most extreme 4-cat punt you have ever seen. But that's just in order to keep.
So you punt 4 categories in a dynasty format.
That's what I've. You do not do that off the bat, please.
Yeah.
Please do not do that off the bat. But in year 5, as the league starts getting more and more top heavy because guys want to rebuild, that could end up happening. And so I'm sitting here like, I don't care about points at all. I don't care about threes at all. I have like a sub 70% free throw percentage, and then turnovers. I just happen to be 4th best, worst. There's only 3 teams that have more turnovers than me because I've been trying to keep up so much with the rebounds, field goal percent, steals, assists, and blocks. So like, it can get ridiculous. But right off the bat, you do not want to be punting that extreme because you're going to lose out on a lot of value throughout the draft. Kind of like what I did with Simmons at 21, but according to my dynasty rankings that everybody should check out if you're a Fantasy Pass subscriber, that is not that much of a reach. It's only about 4 spots according to my rankings.
Yes, and your rank. I'm joking. I've been avoiding looking at your rankings for.
I could tell with where you took Bradley Beal.
Well, I gave me a little bit of a dig, but also fair.
Got him.
Yeah, no, I mean, so yeah, Rhett, you do a lot of work on the draft guide. You should all should check out his punting guide, or sorry, not your punting guide, your dynasty guide, as well as your dynasty rankings. But real quick, back on the punting multiple categories. Not only, you lose out on a ton of value in the immediate, but I imagine that might make it a little difficult down the road too, right? Would there be certain rookies that you just sort of overlook in general because of that type of build, or would you prefer to grab value in going forward in the years that ignore your punt build, and then you just sort of figure it out from there?
When it comes to rookie drafts, I would say almost always go for value and not really worry about the punt, especially if you're a team that has such a solidified punt, because you may not believe in that rookie and that rookie may not fit your team very much, but someone else might believe in him, and then you can go out and get a player that fits better rather than reaching against, like if you're a punt field goal team, for instance. A lot of guys had this issue and they had the 2nd overall pick in their rookie draft this year. They were like, I think I might take Jalen Green. It's like, no, you should not do that. You should take Evan Mobley because he's the 2nd best rookie. And then either Evan Mobley develops and he's a positive contributor to your team in spite of you punting field goal percentage, or somebody's going to come out and really believe in Evan Mobley, and you can go out and get a big that actually does make sense for that build rather than trying to get cute with it with your rookie draft. If you strongly believe in Jalen Green over Evan Mobley, then I can't talk you out of that, but don't make it build and team specific. Too many guys get way too focused on trying to fit the build rather than just taking the best player available, getting a lot of value with your picks, and keeping in mind that it's a dynasty. It is long-term, so you can always try to make moves if you have the firepower to do so.
So obviously some of the real life elements that bleed into a fantasy draft, like, long-term upside, the age factor with these younger players. Is there any other elements that you take into consideration for a long-term build, like a player's contract situation with a particular team, with like a secured role that you feel confident with? I mean, what are some of these other elements that you should be looking for with both immediate and long-term in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. One great example of this was Terry Rozier. Travis and I had him in like the 80-ish range for the dynasty rankings, just because he's an expiring deal on a team that could be trying to go younger, who had James Bouknight in the wing. Like, they literally just drafted him, and Terry Rozier's coming up on an expiring deal. So as soon as Rozier gets that extension, we're like, okay, we got to bump him up, because if they believe in him enough to give him that money, then we should believe in him enough to bump him up the rankings based on what he can produce on that team in that role. And I think that's a lot of what Travis and I try to look at, is like, okay, RJ Barrett, Travis and I are probably higher on RJ Barrett than just about anybody else out there, but that's because RJ Barrett is on the Knicks. They believe in him, and we believe in his ability to get better. He may not be a great fantasy player right now, but he's going to be the guy. He will be one of the guys. And that's one of the things, like, you'll see it with Andre Drummond this year. A couple of years ago, he's an insane fantasy player, but the league didn't like him. He wasn't actually a good real life player. No. So I have Andre Drummond on my team. Like, I know, because I've dealt with it for the last year, where he's been bought out and just generally terrible everywhere. So it makes sense to get guys that are are going to be secure in their role. And that's why typically I tell people to build off guards and wings right off the bat, because this league is perimeter oriented. Obviously, there's some exceptions. Like you take Bam, you take Jokic, like you take the bigs that are elite, like the Sabonis's. Those guys are probably not going anywhere. Their role probably isn't changing. But then when you get into the later rounds and you're looking at like Wendell Carter Jr., like the guy that I got in a trade, he could get pushed back by Bamba. Like, you have no idea what that role is going to be. So trying to invest in players that are invested in by teams is very important in my mind, because like I keep saying, it's about long term. It's about the potential of a guy, but it's also about the potential in the other direction, about somebody who can just be replaced like that.
I have so many more questions. There's like every answer, there's like a branching series of questions. Dynasty is complex. It's just such a cool format, man.
I'm here for it.
Well, here's another one. Do you have a preference? Say that someone wants to start up their own Dynasty League this year. Do you have a preference between, and maybe it's a personal preference, or maybe you think there's just certain formats that fit better with Dynasty? Would you prefer a head-to-head league or a roto league or points format, or any of those three interchangeable, or do you feel that one fits with the format a little bit better?
That's a great question. I'm not sure there's one that's better than the other, but I think the most important part is to talk to people who have been in that type of league before, to see what they've learned after doing it for a couple of years. I know my league that's been around for about 5, we've changed a couple things throughout the process. We've learned some things that do and don't work. We've learned that teams will tank, so you have to have some tanking, like some mitigation techniques in there for that. You've learned like there's a certain number of IR spots that make sense, roster spots as a whole, because otherwise, if you have shallow rosters, you're not stashing any prospects if you're trying to win. So you can get you have to get creative with that. But as far as scoring goes, I mean, it depends on the scoring itself. I actually am working on one right now that's trying to create a point system that tries to get the top 20 fantasy players as close to the top 20 real life players as possible. So it's like an actual real representation of the actual NBA versus, in 9-cat, Miles Turner is the 14th best player in 9-cat, but he's not I'm a Pacers fan. He's not the 14th best player in the NBA. So it gets real interesting when you try to do those fun things, but I don't think there's one that's necessarily better. It's just, it all depends on your flavor.
Yeah, I could definitely. We're all still looking for the right format, because I can assure you that Trae Young is not outside the 50 best players in the NBA from my point of view.
Right, Luka's not outside the top 35. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, Giannis should be debated as the second best player.
Exactly.
In the draft.
Exactly.
And you have mentioned another point about an ability to stash prospects, which. Does that mean you look for deeper bench settings, or in the way that you like to set up your leagues? And is that sort of a competitive advantage for maybe those who want to stack on role players to be competitive in the immediate?
That's absolutely what that means, and you'll see a lot of teams do it. But there's also a balance of, like I said earlier, keeping those assets together in case you do want to make another move. Like, guys can sell out, and like I said, draft Justin Holiday, draft Danny Green, draft Dwight Howard. You can draft all those guys and have them on your back end of your bench, or you can take a flyer on James Robinson Earl or Bones Highland, like guys like that. You can just throw young guys on the bench, and your roster rolls over no matter what. So you can just keep them and then hope to see what happens. Especially, I find guys do that with players that are on their team, like the team that they root for. So like I have a bunch of Pacers on my roster, just on the back end of my roster. I got Isaiah Jackson and O'Shea Brissett, and then Edmund Sumner on IR. So that's a sort of fun way to look at it, where you can have some buy-in for your personal team in there too, without feeling like you have to pay a huge penalty for having guys you believe in at the back end of your roster. So like my 12 team, we have 20 players, 12 active, 8 bench, and then 3 IR. A lot of leagues will have minor slots as well, with certain game criteria, age criteria to meet. So like they don't even take a roster spot. It's just an additional minor slot. Like you just have him in there until he meets a certain game or age threshold that doesn't even change your roster building at all.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to get into this format in terms of evaluating these younger prospects, particularly like guys coming in like this latest class? what level of research do you do to assess their fantasy games? Do you watch much college ball? I mean, what is some of that process like?
Find people who do all of that stuff and get all of that information together and then put your own spin on it. That's what I would recommend. Travis did a lot more of the rookie evaluation because he watches a lot more college basketball than I did. I watched a lot of the higher level players, like I would catch specific games, but he was doing rookie blurbs for like the 20 to 30s, and so like he could rattle off whatever stats or whatever statistical profile you wanted for those guys. So there's definitely some level of research you should be doing by yourself, because obviously you want to be seeing these guys play and seeing what you think. But there's also a lot of people out there who put a lot of time and effort into putting together projections for what they can be, taking the advanced stats from their college, seeing how they translate to the pros in past years, and then using that as a model to try and project what this year's draft class is going to be. There's so much information out there, you can get overwhelmed pretty easily. But yeah, typically watch as many games as you can. Try to pay attention to the little things that matter for fantasy, which sometimes takes away from like enjoying the game, because you're like, he doesn't really shoot that well from three, so maybe like, I don't know, it hurts my field goal percentage and doesn't hit a ton of threes. Maybe he's a punt three guy. So it can kind of get don't get too wrapped up in it that you're not enjoying college basketball, but you should probably be watching some games or just trusting a lot of people out there who do.
Yeah, I'm more in that bucket when I'm trying to figure out some of these rookies, because I guess I don't have enough time to watch all this college basketball and all the NBA games, and it's a lot, man. But of course, that does fit with the theme of the the format.
And it's also okay that you don't watch any college basketball. Like I said, I didn't watch very much, and like I'm still doing okay at this. So as long as you have a good process and you understand what it is that goes on in these dynasty leagues, you'll be all right.
Before we head out here, what would be the impassioned argument that you would give to someone in a keeper league to make the switch or shift to a dynasty format? Because I know there's a little contention between the two. Some people are just like, just dive right in. I mean, what would you say to those people out there that are a little hesitant?
In a keeper league, and I tell this to anybody who asks the question, in a keeper league, it is all about top end talent. Like, it literally doesn't matter what your team is unless you're trying to win right this second. It doesn't matter what your team is outside of those top 6 keepers. Like, the entire time during the year, you should be spending consolidating all of those players. And so it's just not a very realistic way to look at it, because you could just keep 2 for 1, 2 for 1, 2 for 1. And now all of a sudden you have 6 top 20 dynasty guys, when in reality, the only reason you're able to pull that off is because you have to keep cutting guys from your roster. So there's different levels of strategy to it. I understand why you should be doing it's so you can spread the league out. It's like, yeah, but also if you're not winning, you really don't care about any of the players on your roster. It desensitizes you to them, because it's just asset. Because you're going to cut them after a certain point. So you're just trying to group them together, send them out. And I mean, I've done keeper leagues. I don't mind them. They're good for what they are, but there's also a different level to when without a doubt whoever you have on your roster will just be there until you decide to make a decision, and you're not forced to make a decision.
Oh man, yeah. I have a lot of thoughts that I'm going to take going forward into my keeper league back home. That's where me and my friends playing. We change up the rules every season. This would be a lot to maybe introduce all the elements that would be necessary here to switch that to Dynasty. But man, it is fun. It is a lot of fun, and you are incredibly plugged into what you do, as is Travis. But everyone, check out the Fantasy Hoopball, the Fantasy Draft Guide at Hoopball. Check out Rhett's work. Rhett, if you can hear me, I really appreciate you coming on, man. We will definitely talk more going forward, and we will definitely have another Dynasty check-in on this channel at some point.
Awesome. Appreciate that. Thanks for having me on and let me ramble for however long. Dynasty's my favorite, so.
It shows, man, and that passion is exactly what we love talking about here. We love bringing people on who love that format. It's what people who watch this channel love too. So hopefully y'all watching got some helpful information out of this, and maybe you want to start your own Dynasty League. Rhett is the man to help you with all of that if you choose to do so. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Drop a like too, and follow Rhett and I on Twitter on our handles down there below. And yeah, that'll be it for now. That's the wrap on this strategy series. We'll be back with more videos coming up next week. So thank you all for tuning in. We'll check it out next time.